based on the Disney villain Cruella de Vil, starring Emma Stone as Cruella de Vil. This movie basically serves as an origin story to how Cruella became the horrible piece of shit human being that she is. Cruella de Vil has always been the Disney villain that I've probably hated more than anyone, and not because I, hate the character. Well, I do hate the character. I do think she's a great villain, but she's the type of villain you love to hate because she's just awful. She wants to kill animals to make codes, and in 101 Dalmatians, she's going after puppies. It's about as awful as you can get. At least when you're a dog lover like me. So at the very least, I was definitely interested in the idea of seeing an origin story to how she became such a terrible, evil monster. Also a big fan of Emma Stone. Emma Stone, typically, she's a pretty great actress. I don't think she's been in a lot of movies that I didn't like, nor has she ever really given a performance that I said, well, she wasn't good in that. Also had a pretty good cast surrounding her, so I had a feeling this movie definitely had some promise. So getting into what works the best for this movie right out the board, the performances everywhere are excellent. Emma Stone is awesome in this movie. I had a feeling she would be really good. She absolutely crushes it in this movie as Cruella. What I appreciate seeing with her is at a young age, you could tell there was some kind of conflict in her. There was a side that kind of wanted to be better, or at least wanted to try to be better, but she had this kind of rebellious, angry, sort of evil side to her ever since she was young. I do like that the movie plays on how in this movie her initial goals was to be a big fashion designer. She wanted to be the biggest one ever, so she has an eye for what's stylish, what would make her look good, what would make anyone look good. With that aspect anyway, I thought it really worked for her origin story, and I thought Emma Stone really did crush it in that sense. I certainly bought her as a younger Cruella, she's up and coming, she wants to make a name for herself, she hasn't totally discovered who she is yet, but she definitely has that, snarky, obnoxious, really bossy kind of attitude that Cruella has always possessed, at least the Cruella that we know. The other name I really got to give a lot of credit to is Emma Thompson, who plays essentially Cruella's boss in this movie. She's like the head of this fashion company that Cruella starts working for. She absolutely killed it in this movie too. I loved her character because she is ultimately a fragment of the representation of what Cruella is going to become. This woman is fucking awful. She is heartless. She doesn't care about anyone or anything. Her goal is to just have the best looking appearance or best looking outfit that she can make. She treats employees like they're nothing. She treats people like they're nothing. She takes all the credit for people's work. She's a pretty selfish bitch. I do love the rivalry that does develop between her character and with Cruella, because soon enough Cruella kind of wants to usurp her, and that is kind of what leads to Cruella's trajectory towards becoming the villainess that we know her of. I did also really love the banter between them going back and forth. I thought their chemistry in this movie was really good. From when Cruella's working with her to when Cruella's competing against her, it all works really well in that sense. I also want to give major props to Joel Fry and Paul Walter Hauser. I believe I pronounced that name correctly. They're the two guys who played Jasper and Horace, who are ultimately Cruella's accomplices or minions, however you want to describe them. But they're both really good in this movie, and I actually like the portrayal they gave both of them. In Jasper's case, he's always seen as the smarter one of the duo, but he does at times appear to try to be Cruella's voice of reason, to be like, okay, if you're going to commit this crime, you need to go about it this way, or if you want to do this, it should go that way, and she's not always listening to him because, she has that inflated ego, like, no, I'm right, this is how it needs to be done. Paul Walter Hauser, though, as Horace, was easily the funniest character in this movie. He's definitely the comic relief, and he does really well here. I didn't know who he was at first, and then when I recognized him and it clicked, I was like, oh shit, he's the old guy from Cobra Kai. Granted, every star that's in Cobra Kai is playing an older version of themselves, but he's like the old guy who's part of Cobra Kai when all the kids are there. I don't know, his character was hilarious in that show, and he's hilarious in this movie, so I'm like, yeah, I want to see more of you. You've got what it takes to be funny. He has a lot of slapstick humor. He does come off as like, the dumb one that's just kind of there to make you laugh, but probably feels like that's kind of what he was always meant to be. The big flaw that I guess I would have with this movie ultimately, though, is the execution of the origin story. I was on board with pretty much everything. Cruella's upbringing to a point, her goals to be a fashion designer, I thought was the perfect choice. But where I struggled was the fact that this movie was trying to make her a sympathetic character. Throughout the movie you see with her, and easily throughout her life, especially early on, she really went through some shit. She went through the kind of stuff that could definitely leave people messed up. But the thing is, I was not yet fully convinced that she had totally gone like horribly bad as she's meant to. I mean, in this movie, she has like 2 dogs with her this whole time. I mean, one's Jasper and Horace's, but one is hers that she's had since childhood. And, you know, she has no intentions of killing it or hurting it. She loves that thing as her own. And I see that, I'm just like, that doesn't really go with Cruella's character. Cruella's like, no, I will kill every animal to make a coat. And there are even moments later on in the movie where Cruella is finally starting to teeter towards being a really just shitty person. Well, not a totally shitty person, but she is just kind of being an asshole to the people in her life who are trying to be there for her. But then it reaches a point in the movie where she kind of feels like that's wrong, and then she tries to make amends and tries to get forgiveness. I'm just like, that is not what Cruella would do. Again, those are 2 areas with the character that I don't think they really should have gone with. I mean, the goal is to show how she became one of the most awful people ever. And when you show things that go against her character, like wanting to keep people in her life, the people who deserve to be there, wanting to treat them better, taking care of and loving a dog with no intention of killing it to make a coat, I'm like, that's not the Cruella I know. I will say this though, the movie does leave the door open for a sequel, and I heard a sequel is in development. So my guess is maybe Disney feels it's like the story for Cruella de Vil. It's gonna be a longer one, we need more than one movie. If that's the case, I could get a little more on board with it. But I will say this, just for what this movie did in itself in trying to be an origin story for Cruella, I can only give it partial credit. Now, unless it's setting up for more, then I could get a little bit more on board with it. I could be a little bit more forgiving. But I've always said this before. The signs of great movies are ones that can just stand on its own. I'm never one who's like, oh, but it's setting up towards this. It's going to set up towards this really good sequel. It's going to set up towards this big franchise. I'm never a fan of that. I'm always like, no. As a movie, you need to stand on your own. You can't just build on promises and potential. And with that, I think this is a fine movie. I think it's got great performances, but the execution and its premise, I'm just not that big of a fan of, because I don't think it fully did the job that it should have. I think it should have at least led more into her becoming a piece of shit. Like, if it's gonna set up into more movies, fine. But by the end of this movie, we should ultimately be rooting against her. And by the end of this movie, you're not. And I don't know, for me, it doesn't feel like the job executed right. All in all, I thought Cruella was a fine movie. Performances across the board were excellent. Emma Stone and Emma Thompson both absolutely slayed in this movie together. I thought both of them were casted perfectly. I thought they both acted perfectly. Their chemistry together, perfect. There were definitely aspects of Cruella's origin story that I appreciated, that I could definitely get behind. I do think the execution in the story was a little back and forth. I mean, sometimes it's a heist movie, other times it's, you know, learning more about Cruella's past, other times it's a character story. It tried to be a little too much. I forgot to mention that earlier, but it does try to do that a little bit. And they also tried a little too hard to make Cruella a sympathetic character, and some people might sympathize with her. But the thing is, I don't want to sympathize with her. I don't think we should sympathize with her because of what she becomes. I want to see her just be a shitty, awful human being that wants to kill dogs to make coats. Because that's her weird character is. And maybe it is taking a couple movies to get there, but I'm hoping, in the end, with this franchise, if it's gonna be that, I hope it leads to that. Because if it doesn't, then unfortunately we're gonna look back on this movie and say, well, that was a waste of time. I'm hoping it doesn't get there, because there definitely is potential. That's all I gotta say, guys. Thank you so much for watching my video. Don't forget to leave a comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.